Hey there. I'm excited that we're back together. I wish we were actually in the classroom. This week, here's what we're going to work on. We are going to be looking at kind of the last half of the book of Exodus. At the end of the week, we're going to have a quiz. That quiz will cover everything from Mount Sinai to the end of the chapter. So be prepared to do that. It'll be just like all the quizzes have been. I know we're a little bit out of the routine. We're going to get back in through this week. And so we've been asked to make you videos for instruction this week. That instruction is to kind of get the content moving again so that we can make it through the entirety of the course load. Tell you what, things are a moving target right now. Figuring out how to get everything kind of in, it's going to take some adjustment. So keep your eye on Moodle. I know several of you have sent me messages saying that, hey, I have games coming up. I have trip planned for fall break time, which we don't have now. So next week when that happens, we'll have courses, but you're not going to be here because you already had plans made. Here's what I have to do. I have to say this. This is your responsibility. Keep your eye on Moodle and look for the changes and the things that we're going to need to do in regard to that. I think I have Moodle pretty well up to date, though it's gonna keep changing a little bit. All right, so I'm going to try to keep these videos concise, which means you need to jump on to the end of each week of Moodle and look at the running classroom notes. Likely there are going to be some places where I encourage you take a look at scripture or OTS, the book, Old Testament survey, so that you can get the material need, because to get everything in, I can't make, I would have to make long videos, and I know you're not going to sit and watch long videos. So with that being said, I'm going to share on the screen right now the classroom notes, and that isn't what I wanted. So let me see if I can get the right thing up. Here we go. We're going to take a look starting today, and I'm going to remind you that Exodus is kind of a story, a play, a narrative in kind of 4 acts. So the beginning of Exodus is this. It's the story of from Joseph to the birth of Moses to the situation that the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, find themselves in. The second act is Hebrew, is the point in which Moses is finding his Hebrew roots and finding out who he is and how God is calling him to be a part of God's saving, redeeming work of the people. And the next act is actually the escaping, being rescued from Egypt. God rescuing the people using Moses and Aaron to deliver them out into the wilderness. And the last time I believe we were together, we started talking about the wilderness scene. And this is the testing of God's people to begin to make God's people into something. Here's where we are. Getting to Exodus 19, we have a story of God beginning to organize and bring his people into kind of a nation, becoming a people with organization, with rhythm, with leadership, that know how to take care of one another. Because you remember, they're leaving all of that, what they knew before, behind, and now God's organizing them. And we have a story, which we're not going to cover, of Moses' father-in-law, the priest of Midian, encouraging Moses, you got to organize these people. You got to raise up other leaders. And then Moses learns from that. But where we are now is we want to begin with Exodus chapter 19. And what we want to do in Exodus 19 is we want to look at really the third covenant we're going to look at from the Bible. And if you'll remember, a covenant is a relational agreement, a binding promise between 2 groups. And this happens to be the binding promise, which is connecting everything that happened from the blessing that happened for the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve to then the flood story and the Noah covenant, then the Abraham covenant. This is the connection. This is tying all this together. And so we see here that we're reminded that God told Abraham that I'll bless you, that I'm going to make you a great nation, and that I'm going to be your God. And here we have the same thing happening in Exodus chapter 19. God coming to Mount Sinai. Now, here's the context. Here's where we are, the location. It's very important. Mount Sinai. After coming through the desert, they find themselves here at Mount Sinai, and God is going to come to the top of the mountain in a powerful presence and force. And there he is going to, before anything else happens, he is going to make a covenant with his people. He is going to remind them that they are going to be a blessing, that they're being pulled back into this promise, that they are going to be a nation of priests. They are going to represent God to the world around them, and that God is going to be with them. His presence is going to be there. And so they make a covenant promise, and they say, absolutely, that's what we want to do. And so in this moment, they kind of raise Noah up as their leader. And so we get the next part of this is God then beginning to speak to Moses on behalf of all of the people. And he gives them what we know as the 10 Commandments. So let me kind of bring this into view like this for a minute. What begins to happen at this point is not just going to be in the book of Exodus. You're going to find pieces of this that are spelled out in further detail in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Numbers. Leviticus and Numbers are going to really spell out 631 unique Torah laws or instructions for God's people. Now, we often think of the commands of God as the 10 commandments, the 10 instructions. And these are the ones that have become famous. And there are some obvious reasons for that the 10 commandments show us that the Israelites are in a binding relationship with God. And these 10 commandments give us a picture of what it looks like to connect with God and then connect with other people. And so it's important for us to have an idea about this. Now, here's where I want to pause. To keep this video short, I don't have time to go through all 10 commandments. So what I want to do is I want to break them up quickly and tell you that the first 4, and I want to encourage you to go in and to look at these 10 commandments to have a good idea of what they are. The first several of them are about the relationship, the covenant between God and people, that there is only one God, that we're not going to turn to other gods. We're not going to follow other gods. We're not going to worship other gods, that we are going to be loyal. We're going to have faithfulness, fidelity to God, and we're not going to turn to other gods. And that's the first really 4 commandments. It's about centering our lives, human life, around God and that relationship. And then the other commands, then the second part of those commands are about how we would then begin to treat other people, how through our relationship with God and that covenant, we then begin to treat one another. You know, this is actually a pretty unique thing. Culturally speaking, all of the nations around Israel at this point, they have customs and cultures and to some degree kind of rules and regulations. But one of the things that I want to point out here is the 10 Commandments, and then really the book of the Torah, the instructions, the guidance, the teaching, really set the Hebrew people, the Israelites, apart as different than all other nations, because they're called to treat one another with dignity and respect, to honor one another, to have God be their determination for how they would then treat and trust one another. And so it's a powerful picture. Jesus summarized it like this in Matthew chapter 22, and then in several other places throughout the Gospels. And that's the kind of the narrative accounts of the life of Jesus in the New Testament. When some religious leaders came and said, what are the most important commandments? Jesus actually summarized all 10 commandments. And he said, you're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, which is a paraphrase found in Deuteronomy chapter 6 of the 10 commandments. In other words, if you're loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, you're focused, and you love your neighbor as yourself, then you're honoring the law and the commandments. So we could say that really this is it. Love God and love other people. Jesus, in his greatest teaching, which is found in Matthew chapter 5-7, which is called the Sermon on the Mount, he actually dives deeply into the 10 commandments, and he uses them as the foundation for the behavior. But he then makes a point. These aren't just rules. These 10 commandments and the then 613 laws that are given to the people, they aren't just like rules that you're to just, yep, I kept that. They're to be something that's happening inside of us. They're guiding us and they're changing us in a spiritual nature on the inside. And so when he gives the Sermon on the Mount, he sees the legal requirement and he says, but really, if your heart's for God, you could take it to here. You could up it. Example, he said, you have heard it said, you shall not kill. You shouldn't commit murder, which is obviously one of the 10 commandments. And he says, but I tell you, if you call your brother a fool, then you're guilty. His point was, you know what, if you just make this about a legal requirement, you can get away with almost anything except murder. But I'm here to tell you, this was always about your heart. So if you will look at these 10 commandments and you will think about them, you'll see that this is God trying to guide these people in a powerful, wise way. The people, of course, when they heard these commands, maybe partially based on how they were treated in Egypt, they said, this sounds brilliant. This sounds good. Let's do it. And so they build an altar. They pile up 12 stones representing each of the tribes of Israel back to the sons of Jacob. We're going back to, these are the 12 groups. And so then they bring an offering, and then they write this book. They make a book of covenant, and then they seal it with blood. And I just want to point to the fact that all of this is ultimately pointing to Jesus, that Jesus is going to he is going to embody the 10 commandments. He is going to embody honoring God with everything. He's going to embody loving other people with all of his heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he's going to show how that works. So again, I can't go over all the details, but giving the big picture, God brings his presence to this mountain. And there the people begin to encounter God. They see, they feel, they experience him. They encounter him there. And he tells them, you should prioritize relationship with me, and you should prioritize how you treat other people. And this then becomes the framework of everything that's going to be spelled out in really the next several books of the Bible. This is who we are. In the next section, which I'm going to make that video here in just a minute as well. We're going to make a transition where we're going to talk about God's presence with, we're going to talk about God's presence with them, God being on the mountain, and then God saying, it's not enough for me to be on the mountain. I want to come and be in the center of what you do. And we'll talk about that with the tabernacle. Please, again, here's the reminder. Check out the notes. Look at some of the links that maybe goes with it. to fill out your understanding. And then I'll do another video. We'll probably have 2 short videos like this week. That will be the entire class length, and then a quiz this weekend. All right. Thank you all.